So basically, it's kind of a two-part talk on just some things that I've found extremely useful um, in both the front end design of the world and some things to consider when you start going out and building your own apps or if you do freelance work. Um, it's just some good food for thought for future things that not a ton of people talk about, but the people that do talk about it know what the hell they're talking about. And I've just basically learned about progressive enhancement and within the last 2 weeks, and I've completely drank the Kool-Aid on it, and it's completely changed how I've been thinking about designing websites and applications. So first I'm not going to really play through these, but first I just kind of want to go over organizing SaaS and designing deliberately. So I talk a lot lately about not using Bootstrap as your crutch for doing all your design and your styling, because there's so much work that you have to do and there's so much stuff going on in the background and you don't have a ton of control over it. So I've been writing just straight CSS or Sass lately and designing stuff, which if you look at the new Firehose Lightning Talks app, that's completely stripped out Bootstrap out of that. And one good thing that I've learned is how organization is like the number one thing when you're dealing with this. So I can show you what I'm talking about in terms of organization. So this is the actual Firehose Lightning Talk app. And I kind of break down Sass into two sections: your base Sass, which will have your font imports, your global settings. So this will be all your just HTML things that you're going to reuse frequently: containers, alignments, alerts, buttons, inputs, things that you'll use on nearly every page of your application or your website you're designing. A base typography, and then all your variables, which comes in handy. And then, so that's kind of the base of your styling. That's what you're going to build upon. And then from there, you can go into components. So we have our admins page. We have cards that are going to be reused throughout the application. We have a footer, the landing page, and our search boxes. So the reason why I do this is because especially working on groups or coming back and working on your code at a later date, it's super difficult to jump in and look at a big long CSS file of Bootstrap overrides and you're not quite sure what's going on and you want to modify something and it wasn't named properly, which I was prone to do in my beginning stages of coding. I would name things really random and they weren't descriptive. And now I've started switching over to this style. So if I wanted to change something on our admin page, I can quickly jump into my admin styling. I can fix something right away. It's very easy. You don't have to worry about anything else. You don't have to search through code. It's just really straightforward. And then something I just kind of wanted to go over because Rails does a lot of things in how gems get installed. So when you install the Bootstrap gem, we use add imports to import Bootstrap. But if you look through your style sheets, you actually don't see any of the files there. So it's not being presented. So this is just a good example of how that actually works. So each one of these are written as partials. And then in order for me to actually utilize them, you just import them into your main application file. Pretty straightforward. Obviously, it's CSS, so everything's cascading, so you need to make sure that you order them in the right order. So your fonts always will have to come first because that's, you're going to build everything basically off of fonts, which is kind of weird to think about, but, you're going to set your variable properties and you're going to use font families. You're going to use your variables in your typography and so on and so forth. So if it's not working properly, just make sure that you have imported in the right order and life will be so much easier. So that's kind of just a high-level example of organizing. And the reason why you want to do this is because it's super maintainable. You can precisely style everything that you need to do It's scalable, so in the future when you need to make a change, you're only making a change to a small portion. Everything's in a tidy little bow that you don't have to go through, and you don't have to make crazy changes throughout your whole entire styling, which is a nightmare for running on any older applications. And it's super friendly, so if anybody wanted to jump in and contribute to an open source project like Lightning Talks app, and you wanted to work on some of the styling, or there's a bug that needs to be fixed, there's a couple things that do need to be fixed, which I'll be issuing issue requests for, you can jump in and it won't be too confusing for somebody who's not used to it to find the location of what they're looking for, because it is human readable and because it's organized in the way it is. So that's kind of the first part. Just a little overview of something to think about when you're going through and designing your applications. And if you want to start straying away from frameworks and getting the foundations really under wraps and figure out exactly what you want to do. So it's kind of something to just consider when you're developing applications. So the second part is progressive enhancement. And this is the Kool-Aid drinking that I've been doing. Basically, it is a strategy that emphasizes accessibility, HTML, and your style sheets and scripting. So when the web was built, there's so much fragmentation, and we've kind of got under a web standard, and we've gotten to a point again where we're starting to fragment from a standard. So everybody's kind of branching out and doing their own thing. So progressive enhancement is the technique of starting from your base HTML. So you can write a website and it will work on Netscape 4 if you have some weirdo that has not had any new technology in 20 years and wants to use something old, can still read your website. Or it'll work all the way up to Firefox Nightly's. And then you also won't be restricted from speed. So if I have a website, like I was telling Ken earlier, before I stripped out Bootstrap from our Lightning Talks app, the app was, I think, 6.1 megabytes or 6.2 megabytes, which all in all isn't huge in like the United States or in Europe or Asia where you have really fast internet speeds. That stuff loads fairly quickly. After I stripped out Bootstrap, now our Lightning Talks app is only 1.3 megs. That's going to be a big performance increase for somebody who's on dial-up or somebody who only gets 1 meg down. So the site's not going to take forever loading. So it's something to consider when you're doing that. Your audience is not always necessarily just you or the people you talk to. Most of us are in affluent style areas relative to the rest of the world. So we have fast computers, we have fast internet, we have access to these things, where if you look at Africa, for instance, almost everybody's running off 3G. 6 megs on a 3G connection on a cell phone is fairly unacceptable. So you want to start out with a base layout, and that's kind of where you go out with your semantic HTML. So I just built this simple little layout because it's really easy to get into the weeds and this stuff, and people do it justice way more than I can. So you want to start with a base layout, and this is going to be readable on any device. Any device that can read HTML will be able to read this, and they'll be able to have a specific experience. And this is just kind of the styling. So just do it super simple. We have floats that's used in all, you can use that all the way back, I think Netscape was like the last browser that leveraged that CSS style, so you should be able to use it. So basically anybody who's got a computer in the last 20 years that has an internet browser will be able to experience this website in exactly the same way as everybody else at the bare minimum. And then just put in mobile breakpoints and all that lovely stuff, which you guys already know about. And then here I just have our base styling for an article. So this is just going to be a straight up text, and I can just show you what what the actual website looks like. Nope. So this is what it would look like at the end. So it's nothing special. Like I said, I didn't want to get into the weeds. It can go way deeper than what this is. But it's just a simple text website. But everybody is going to have the base experience. And from there, you start building upon that. And that's where the progressive enhancements come from. So this is what it would look on a 10-inch tablet and up, and this is what it's going to look on mobile. Nothing special, but everybody's basically going to be served up with the same experience no matter what browser you're using, what device you're using. Everybody's going to get that experience. And this is kind of where @Sports comes into effect, which is a pretty nifty new thing that I started learning recently. And you can leverage specific CSS attributes that aren't supported for different devices to make your browsing experience more of a base and global usability. So it's very similar to media queries, where you will declare @supports, and then you'll put in your code that you want to abide by that specific thing. And so for here, I wanted to utilize Flexbox instead of just standard floats, because floats are the way of the past, and it's time to start leveraging some of the new stuff that we have. Most browsers support Flex, so this is not the best example. Like I said, I have links to other talks that have way better examples, but if you want to look at it, Flex is supported by nearly every browser except for IE8. 11 has partial support. So it's not the greatest example of it, but it's pretty neat how it actually works. So how @Supports works is when you declare @Supports, you can put in the attribute you want to check and see if that browser supports. So for instance, we want to use Flex. So we're going to suggest to look for whether or not it supports display Flex. So anything IE11 won't load any of the styling. IE8 won't load any of the styling. Only browsers that support display Flex will load the styling. So now you have a base experience, and everybody who can support the new hotness on the market will be able to experience an enhanced experience. It's going to be nicer. It's going to look better. It's going to be styled better. And you can just override all the CSS that you did on the basic experience, and this kind of gives you the ability to use the latest technology to support certain devices, make it super responsive and user-friendly. And then I did the same thing with the articles as well. So this is more of an example of the power of @Support. So if you look at a website, in magazines and books, you have the first letter of a paragraph that really kind of shines and has that emphasis on it. CSS, doing this in CSS sucks. It's terrible. It should be something that is intuitive, since everybody wants to use it. It's just not available. So if you look at it, it's just something simple. It's just paragraph, first of type. So this is the first paragraph of a number of paragraphs, and the first letter. And we're going to style that first letter, and same with down here. We're going to style the first line with a specific font weight. But what's really cool is there's this new, it's in the web standards, it's in suggested web standards. It's very early into it. It's not even listed on Can I Use, which is this initial letter, which makes the drop caps for paragraphs work exactly how they're supposed to. I think the only browser that actually works with initial letter right now is Firefox Nightly's. So you can run this @Supports, and if you're running the Firefox Nightly browser and it sees that initial letter is here, it will run the initial letter code, which is pretty cool as far as what it says. Otherwise, everybody else gets the same experience. If your browser doesn't support this, you get the fallback experience. If your browser doesn't support this, which pre-IE8 doesn't support first letter, your browser will get the base styling. So then this is just kind of what it looks like with with the drop caps. And because I didn't have the supported browser, the initial letter CSS doesn't actually work. So that's kind of the end of the talk, and it's I don't do it justice by any means, and I won't claim to be the greatest authority on this topic, and there's so much cool stuff. So like I was talking with Ken earlier, there's going to be a new styling, so it's supposed to go hand in hand with Flexbox, which is the CSS grid layout. And as you can see, the only things that support it are Firefox Nightlies, which you need to also have the experimental enhanced flag checked, which nobody does by default. And what the grid layout does is actually creates a grid layout for CSS. Floats were never designed to be a layout element for the way we use them, and which is how Bootstrap leverages, their columns, is by using floats. Flexbox does a really good job of this, but it does have its limitations and its fallbacks. Whereas grids will be a straight up grid. You're gonna be able to set fractions, and it's gonna be able to fill in all this cool stuff. If you want to check it out, you have to download Firefox Nightlies to be able to see it, but I think maybe I can actually see if I can load this up just to show you grids, because it's pretty neat how they work. So if you, let's see, and I lifted a bunch of the stuff I know from Jen Simmons, which I'll link to all this stuff because it is just really good. So because I have the experimental flag ticked on Chrome, this stuff actually works. So you'll have grids on here, but I don't know if I can. I'll have to restart everything if I don't do it. But basically what you're doing is setting up these cool grid layouts where, I don't even think this works properly in Chrome all the way. So you have grid layouts, and this is kind of the power of it, is you can set grids, and then it'll fill spaces, and you get an actual grid experience. You don't get some hacked up CSS to make it work. So it's pretty powerful. Like I said, I don't do it justice. Watch the talks by Jen Simmons and Rachel Andrews, and listen to some of the podcasts, and you'll be drinking the Kool-Aid very fast after that. So that's about it. If you guys want to talk about it, we can.
Very cool stuff. And cool to know about like the Firefox Nightly build. And it's also interesting to know that Firefox is like the company that's at the bleeding edge of some of this stuff. I didn't know that. I kind of assumed the folks at Google Chrome were sort of leading most of this, but it sounds like Mozilla is doing.
Which they do. You just have to. They switched their engine recently, so you have to I think they're using Blink Engine now, so you actually have to go out and download Blink Engine to get like the really advanced stuff, like the initial letter and all that kind of stuff. But there's so much cool stuff that's on the horizon that's gonna kind of throw away a lot of the frameworks as we know them, because you won't need it anymore. It'll be way more lightweight. And same with, there's also columns, I believe it is. So it's kind of like a grid, but you can use it more for its multiple column layout, in which surprisingly, the people who are on the bleeding edge of this is Microsoft. So IE 11 and Edge, full support for this multiple column layout. So if you looked at like a newspaper, you can mimic a newspaper layout or a magazine layout in the multiple column styles. And everybody else, you have to have the experimental flags or the browser prefixing for. And from what I read, actually, Microsoft started the grid layout. They were at the forefront of it, and they're building it to the standard, and they're working with the other browser manufacturers to build out the standard. So as much as I love to hate on Microsoft, they're making a lot of good changes and pushing things forward and not keeping it stagnant like they used to.
Very cool stuff. Does anybody have any questions or any comments for Colin?
I know it's really high level as far as like conceptually, but it's just something to start thinking about. If you want, I'm going to put my slides up with the video when I post it because there are some good links there to listen to some really good talks about all of this stuff, and worth the time listening to the podcast and spending to do it because it's fundamentally changes how you think about designing a website and user experiences. It may not. A big part of this is because I've been working with a client lately, and 90% of the clients he has are going to be major businesses that all have the latest browsers and running the latest operating systems. But because I also know the customers, I know there's tons of old fuddy-duddies that just do not want to upgrade any of their machines. They're still using IE8. So I had to start building some of the fallbacks for that stuff. And it was after writing for a modern system and then having to write fallbacks, I spent almost 20% of the time designing it for those IE fallbacks just because I didn't think about it to begin with. Not that he cared or anything like that, and he flat out told me, don't worry about it, but I also didn't want to screw over some of the people that he works with, so I did build it out, but just thinking about that stuff is important.
Very cool. Well, cool. Awesome talk, Colin. It's interesting to think about some of the new cutting edge things.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to chat about it, I haven't really talked to anybody who has listened or researched any of it. So I've been wanting to talk to people, and everybody I talk to, they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's like, well, this is a terrible conversation. So everybody drink the Kool-Aid so we can talk about it.
Sounds good. I'm pretty excited about it too.
Yeah.
But cool. John, I think you're up last.
Have a blog post about that stuff with all the links to all of the resources by any chance?
Yeah. Basically just look for anything that Jen Simmons has done in the last 2 years. Same with Rachel Andrews. They're going to be the forefront of this stuff. Another thing that I didn't nice, Mike. I didn't talk about CSS shapes, which is really cool, and Jen Simmons has done a lot of work with showcasing some of that stuff, where you can kind of look into the progressive enhancement of using how floats are actually designed to use, and then leveraging the new CSS stuff as an enhancement on it, but have that safe fallback if you need it.